So this whole thing about literature and how to adapt a novel into a movie. I mean, first of all, a novel is a novel and a movie is a movie. And this whole debate always about, you know, what did you like better, the movie or the film, or the book, and so on. If you think of opera for a moment, and Verdi, great operas such as Othello, Falstaff, would you ever compare it to the original Shakespeare? No, because Shakespeare is a play you see on stage. An opera of Verdi you would compare to an opera by Wagner or Puccini, but not to Shakespeare. In films, somehow, there's always this thing. But I find it, how I came to make my first movie out of a book, I told you, because I had the feeling I didn't have anything worthwhile talking about. But it was meant to be the one and only time. Immediately, my second movie, I wrote myself. The first one was very much appreciated. The second one was, by the way, trying to be a film noir, not high art, but what I really like, and meaning just, you know, flicks. And it failed utterly. So I turned again to literature. It worked. Next time I tried again an original, this time a comedy, failed. Back to literature, you know. So after a while I thought, well, rather than to do what you'd like to do, you'd better do what you're good at. And this is how, without any program set before, actually the program was exactly the opposite, especially in the days of the Nouvelle Vague and so on, the author film. You were supposed to write your own movies. Well, the very last one, the one I finished shooting last week, is one I totally wrote and directed and did everything and produced. So, but I'm not so sure about the result. When you start from a book, in a sense, you have the feeling already it is solid. But mostly, if you're insecure about your own experiences and how much you would trust them or not, you don't have this problem when you start from a book. Because you say, well, it's his experience, and anyhow I trust him, and it's sometimes it's even been successful. So you have the feeling you're less inhibited. You already work on something solid. On the other hand, working with writers, I found out that, of course, when they started writing their book, they were extremely insecure about their experience and about what the book was going to be. And while working with them and talking with them, as I said, as far as they were alive, a strange thing happened. I've read the books many times, the novels, of course, before setting to talk with the writer about it. At some point during the conversations, he mentioned an event in his life. We were talking about the movie. In the case of Gunter Grass, it was that he had grown up in the city of Gdańsk, and there was the family was half German and half Polish, mixed an uncle, and came the Polish uncle always came Sundays to play cards and for lunch and so. And there was the grandmother who was Kashubian, yet of another world. And one day this uncle vanished. For the little boy, incomprehensible. He was then 12 or so. And he says, years later, I started to wonder whatever became of this uncle and why didn't he show up anymore. And I realized all of a sudden that this might be the starting point of his book. That this uncle somehow was knocking at his door at night in dreams or elsewhere to find out who he was. Now this uncle in the novel exists indeed, it's his second father, but you might say is one of many characters. The main character is a 3-year-old boy who didn't grow up. And that, he told me, that idea came after he had written 200 pages already. So it is sometimes interesting to when you wonder, you know, how do I turn this book into a novel, is to find out the circumstances of the writing of the novel, what events may have triggered it in the first place, what happened during the writing, and so. Because such you may always hoping that you can come upon the source of the energy, this energy I was talking about, which makes you turn the pages of, say, the Tin Drum. I mean, 600 pages and no story, so to speak. And yet you're fascinated. So what, and in each novel it's different, but each time I found that there were certain moments that felt like the famous life lived, preserved somewhere. Best it shows when you're further on in your work and you're in the rehearsal stage with actors. I correct myself. When you are in the writing stage with your screenwriter, sometimes scenes are translatable extremely well. I mean, they write themselves almost by themselves. The opening of the scene, yeah, we start at this point, the dialogue here and there, end with such a punchline or this or that. Up in one morning, it's done. Other scenes that seem brilliant scenes or whatnot, you slave and you don't get it done. Next experience, during the rehearsal, there are certain scenes where you really wonder with the actors, how will we ever bring this scene to life? I mean, whichever way you read the lines, block the situation, have the actors interact, it's dead, it's paper. And at other times, you know, you feel all of a sudden, wow, something is happening there. And you don't have much to interfere. And I found out that invariably these scenes, easy to write, and the ones that took life almost immediately in the rehearsing period, were the ones of lived experience, of moments in the writer's life that triggered ultimately the writing of the book. But of course, these are 2 or 3 events in a whole novel out of the life of the writer, and the other 500 pages he had to make up somehow. I mean, this is what comes around. So it is not that a writer starts with the structure, first act, second act, fifth act, or like you build a house, a foundation, some pillars, a roof or so. No, he starts with a little element here, which he has to deal with because it's bothering him at night or whenever. And then around this, like crystallization, you know, you have a little piece of sand in an oyster or whatever, you know, things agglomerate around, and then he ends up with having this form, 500 pages of paper with no beginning nor end. Then he starts to look for a structure. But the organic phase comes first. And some don't bother to ever look for a structure. I mean, you take Dostoevsky. You know, he had to write and to deliver weekly installments to the papers he was writing for to make a living, and he had no idea when he started where this will ever go. By the end, he had the whole thing. Now he could think about a structure, but it was in print already, so too late. Tolstoy worked differently. He went through 4, 5, 6, sometimes 15 drafts before he felt that structure and everything was right, and his poor wife Sonia had to type it each time again and again on this old Remington you can still see in his house. So that is basically I'm a good reader, of course, with incredible antennas, can get it just from reading the novel. And of course, I did not only deal with dead ones, with alive ones, but for me, the experience to work with a living author was far more exciting, and the utmost experience was actually the one with Gunter Grass. I'm talking now about the writing of the screenplay. I'm not talking about the making of the movie. That's yet another thing, but maybe I tell you right away. No, I don't. Let's keep some of the sweets for later. Billy Wilder, by the way, I always think of Billy Wilder. I loved him, and he had this story about where and what to put into a screenplay. And he said when he started to work out as a journalist in Vienna, and he wondered how come very exciting little stories the editor-in-chief put on the 5th page on the bottom somewhere. I said, but this is front-page stuff. I mean, this is what people are really interested in. And he says, yeah, I know, that's why I'm putting it on the 5th page. Otherwise, if everything good was on the front page, nobody would bother to keep reading the newspaper. Now people know it's worthwhile going through, rummage through all the pages, so because everywhere hidden is a little sweet. So, life lived, my obsession. The writer starts from a personal experience and from characters who may or not have met in real life. That is, let's call that is the reality behind the book, which is also the period, the time, the circumstances. In the case of the Tin Drum, Gunter Grass, who was a sculptor and a graphic artist, just started to write poems or so when he came upon this uncle and started to write what would, in the late 50s, what would be the post-war German novel. The circumstances, I think, are important because it was the period where the Germans were trying to deal with the guilt about, what have you done? How was this possible? There were several theories. We are all guilty. That's the collective guilt theory. Even the ones who were born later, somehow, because they're still part of the society of their fathers. Other theories, it's all individual. Only some villains did this, and everybody else was a victim coerced into partaking, and so on. Most of them, 99% of German society in the mid-50s had settled on the idea there was a demon, Hitler, some accomplices, Goering, Goebbels, and so on. They took power against our will. that they came to power by a vote, by popular vote, was never mentioned. And then they seduced us with all kind of things, building the autobahns and dealing with work programs, which diminished the unemployment considerably. So we were seduced in following them. So we are not basically responsible for what happened. And here comes into this, and everybody, at least the younger generation, we felt that this is all a big lie. Because we remembered that there had been great enthusiasm in following these dictators, that there had been an excitement of partaking, conquering the world, going from the Atlantic to the Ural, living historical moments every day, so this was not passively being seductive. This was actively taking part with a lot of enthusiasm. But nobody dealt with this. And here came this novel of Gunter Grass, who says, no, it was not the demons, the ones you could see maybe in Visconti's Götterdämmerung or so, huge villains, Mephistophelian people who coerced an entire nation into doing things. No. Gunter Grass showed class, lower middle class, merchants, bakers, greengrocers, the class that had been left aside by both the communists, who were setting on the working classes, and by the more middle class bourgeois national parties, who were setting on the classes of the entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, and the well-established society. But this lower middle class of the merchants and little employees and accountants and whatnot, in fact, were the majority in the meantime of a nation. It was not the proletariat nor the upper bourgeoisie. It was them, and they were neglected by everybody. Nobody took care of them. And this is where the fascists tapped in. They were exactly from this background, and they, in a sense, gave this class the feeling, now is your time. So this is the circumstances under which Grass wrote the book, wrote the novel, and it was a huge scandal. It was a huge scandal because all of a sudden he told, and after the war, this lower middle class was even more the majority of the people. And he said, well, you are the ones who were the active ones, and you were all the local party keepers with your uniforms, and all of a sudden felt important, and went to rallies, and so on and so on. And which is also meaning it could happen almost anywhere, anytime, if there is not strong enough a consensus within the society that this shouldn't happen. So it was a huge scandal, and secondly, it was a huge scandal because he also mixed it up with not only this main hero, who is a dwarf and sometimes kind, but mostly a very villain, mean dwarf, and engaged in incredible pornographic sexual acts around him. And now that kind of scenes, of course, contributed greatly to the sale of the book, but also was the absolute scandal how could you mix, this political statement, sociological statement, with such scenes? These were worlds to be kept apart normally, and here it all came together. To tackle this kind of book in a movie was not an easy thing. anyhow, so this is the reality really behind the book, which I was well aware of. Now, what does the writer and what did Gunter Grass do? He turned this reality, first of all, into a piece of fiction. Fiction in a novel, the world is more bearable, I think. I mean, that's probably why I like novels. Because, first of all, everything seems to make sense. It is understandable. You have a story, you have heroes, which in normal life there is no story, and there are not really heroes. And the whole thing is expressed in dialogue. So the novel is satisfying because it gives an image of the world that is understandable and you can cope with, whereas the real world is so confusing and so diverse and contradictory, you get lost. And so it is, the writer's work is really to take the complexity of the world and to make it into something, you know, in the novel that is somehow round, comprehensible, with some force lines and some emotions to partake in, and people to like and to hate. Now, when you go from the novel to the movie, the step in between is, of course, the screenplay. Now, you would say, since the novel is in words and the screenplay is words too, that shouldn't be too difficult. In fact, I will tell you about the difficulties in a moment. It is not so easy either, because the structure of a novel is one thing, and the structure of a screenplay is totally different. The structure of the novel is, first of all, not meant to be consumed within one evening. You put the book down, you take it up the next day, and so on and so on. Already, if the chapter in itself is round and you go to the end of the chapter and you put the book aside, that's already satisfying enough. So the book is something you go back to. If you don't remember, you can go back to the characters, and so it is a flow. And a screenplay should, of course, be like a theater play. It is meant to be, at one moment the curtain goes up, and now you are there for an hour and a half, or 2 hours, or 2.5 hours, God forbid, and then the curtain comes down, and within this time, you've got to get it all, and there must be somehow a curve that takes you from the beginning to the end without losing interest. So it is words and it is fiction, but it is of a different nature than a novel. It is more, let's say, drama. I don't like the drama thing, because immediately you think of theater, and the good thing about movies is in fact they take you outdoors, in the best case in a Western, out to the streets at night, and you don't want to be aware while you watch a movie that there's a first act, a second act, or whatever. Now there could have been the second act curtain, the famous second act curtain, where, you know, all of a sudden the story is, an event happens that makes you, like a rocket, gives you the energy to go into a third act and then finally come to a conclusion. When you watch a movie, you want to have the feeling of a continuous flow. You don't want to have the feeling of drama. And actually, in modern movies, of course, nobody's even looking for this 5-act or 3-act structure. But for at least the first 100 years of filmmaking, you can pretty much say that every screenplay was built somehow in that way. I like Stendhal had a wonderful definition, not for movie, but for novel, which is a novel is like a mirror walking along a roadside. So immediately, of course, you think of a camera, definition not only of a road movie. but in the sense of a movie that there is a flow in the telling of a story where the interest may be maintained by other things than an intrigue starting and the second intrigue coming in between and the subplot, and then this is solved and then you go into a next act and all that. But that there is more, it's more like an organic flow. So I don't remember that any of the scripts I adapted from novels. I tried to put the novel into this corset of 3 or 5 acts, but rather just trust the fascination of the novel to go from one chapter to another. In writing the screenplay of the Tin Drum, however, we became aware all of a sudden. So just for those who have not seen the picture, there's a little boy. He's born into this lower middle class grocery store, and he's uncertain about whether his mother's husband is his real father or whether his Polish uncle is his father. Sometimes he likes the one, sometimes he likes the other. Sometimes he likes to kill both of them, which he ultimately thinks he does. And this little boy, seeing the world of the grown-ups being so silly and ridiculous in many things, decides at the age of 3, I don't want to grow anymore. Now, he is well aware if I stop growing, the adults are going to wonder, why isn't he growing anymore? So I've got to give him a reason. So he throws himself down the staircase into the basement, and so they can explain, well, he fell down the staircase, and ever since he's not growing anymore. Nevertheless, mentally, he grows enormously, and physically, he grows at least with one member of his body, so that he can accomplish all these sexual acts that were the scandal of the book. At a certain point, when he's 21, and having killed both his father and his mother, in a sense, feels guilty for her death too, and the war is over, he decides now comes the time to grow. He has this little drum which was given to him on his 3rd birthday, and which he kept as a proof that he's still a child all the time, and which allowed him, together with his voice, to produce a scream that shattered glass. So he throws the drum away. He decides from now on I will be growing. He loses the magic power of his voice, and that's where the movie stops. The novel goes on into the post-war years. The sequel was never done. So that's the story line briefly. And then we realized that he is born at the exact moment when the fascists start to show up and Hitler tries his first coup in Munich. When he goes to school, first day of school, Hitler is elected to the presidency, to the chancellery. When he is coming of age, Hitler comes as the conqueror to Gdańsk, to this German city within Polish territory, having liberated the city by invading Poland. Then he enrolls in this little circus. It was entertaining the army, and he comes with this group to Paris just when Hitler conquers Paris. He is in Normandy on D-Day, June 6th, last Monday, 44, when the Allies land. And he is back in Danzig the day the Red Army arrives, and when he turns 21 and decides to grow. So all of a sudden, this story of the boy and his family becomes the story of the arrival, the rise, the apogee, and the end of the fascist movement. So that's the real storyline of our screenplay. Is funny enough world history, the development of this curve, which one is totally unaware of while watching the movie. But it gave us a corset to work on. So the next step, and we came upon, we came to realize this only once we were halfway through. So it's not set out on purpose, this is going to be our structure. We all of a sudden became aware this is the structure, and not only our structure, but of course the structure of the novel to this point. And pretty happy with this. Now, what do you do with the movie? Any movie, you go into pre-production. Pre-production means we need actors to play the part, we need locations to shoot. So we go out and we say, well, where does this take place? In Gdańsk. You make a trip to Poland, you visit the city of Gdańsk, you start to look for actors who have the right age, and meaning you do the exact opposite what the writer did when he turned reality into fiction. Now, in order to shoot this fiction, you need to go back to reality. Ended up in the street where Gunter Grass grew up, and then you look for a character for the baker, which resembles the baker he's been describing, who actually lived in that street, 30 or 40 years earlier. So it is kind of, it seems silly, Why did you do all the detour by a novel? You should have just got to Danzig, to the street, and shoot a movie with the real people there. But of course, what story would you have told? When you are aware of it, after a while, adapting different novels. Say in a boarding school here, you have this Viennese author who went to a military school in Vienna before World War I, and then you go into a Jesuit boarding school in France. You look for, of course, certain power lines, certain similarities. You see, well, would this have inspired him if he had been in this dormitory? If he had fencing classes in this beautiful courtyard, would that have fit with his spirit, and so on. So it's, I like it very much, this thing when I'm going out for location, not only to think, oh, we'll put the camera here, it'd be a great shot. No, is to look at the location and wonder, would this have inspired such and such a writer to go into such and such a novel? It's like a little magic walk you do. He parted from reality to do fiction. Now you try to shoot this fiction, and you look for the proper reality to incarnate fiction. Of course, later, when we start shooting, well, we transform the buildings. Now we have the actors. We change their hairdo, we put them into costumes, we rehearse with them, we reduce the dialogues, we work for certain things, we accentuate this through the editing, meaning we retransform what was real while we were shooting into fiction, into something artificial. Yeah. So that is, I don't pretend to be a philosopher, but since this is the surrounding, this is kind of the little scheme I came up with. Now back to concrete things. The book is called The Tin Drum because Hitler was called the drummer. He was known to be the drummer. He was the first one together with Goebbels apparently to understand, how can you do a campaign by personal appearances from city to village. He was carried by an airplane, which was even stronger. They were using the radio waves. So he was the first real election campaign specialist, and that's why they called him the drummer. And this is for Gunter Grass. Now the tin drum, Blech in German, tin, is when it would be rubbish. When somebody is talking rubbish, you'd call that he's talking tin. So this tin drummer is a rubbish drummer. Okay, that's the background. The foreground is we need a drum, and there is no such drum as described in the book in any toy store in the world, especially not made out of tin. These were the first little drawings on the right side, which I did on a piece of paper to see what this drum might look like before we finally got the one showing there. Next point of reality. As I told you, I was scared to approach this book because I thought it was a pure work of fantasy. Actually, I had been to see the fantastic production designer Ken Adam, who also worked mostly with Stanley Kubrick. His family was from Berlin. He remembered having grown up in Berlin. And he said, yes, I'd love to work on this. I remember these huge buildings with insurance buildings where you had statues of Atlas, holding up the doors, and it was fantastic. And I see what we could all build to create this world where little Oscar is growing up in, and where every building, as in our childhood remembrance, seems huge and out of proportion. And in every backyard there is adventure, and summers last forever, and winters are extremely cold, and so on. Everything is exemplary. That's what we should build. We were in London. He was just working on Superman and had infinite means to do so. And when we then came up with a budget for production design, it was about the double of the entire money we had to make the movie. So I said, we can't do that. We can't build Oscar's world. So we have to go the exact opposite direction, which is, how was it where Gunter Grass grew up? Back to reality. Goodbye Fantasyland. I still today imagine a film that would be made like, say, Alice in Wonderland around the tin drum. But simply for monetary reasons, financial reasons, we couldn't do it. And Gunter Grass had encouraged me to go to Gdansk, and he said, no, it's not a pure work of fiction, of fantasy, of thought out things. It's the tale of my childhood. And he gave me the address, and this is where I ended up. This street here is the universe where Gunter Grass grew up. You couldn't, this is of course gray because it is socialist reality. It may have been a little more lively at the time he was living there, but basically it is certainly not Alice in Wonderland. It is not fantasy, it is not huge buildings. And then next I rang a doorbell and stepped into a house entrance, which is the house he grew up in. Now his, I don't know what this shows here, yeah. Great, I've never used this technology. This was the door to the apartment. This is the main entrance. These are the steps where in the movie there is a shot where he comes down drumming his drum when he got it for his first birthday. And this is the bathroom for all the people living on that floor. And this is behind this door his mother ultimately died. So nothing, and this is the Polish lady who is living now in this house, and as always in Gdańsk, when you go there, they, oh my God, clicked the wrong button. People think when they hear you speak German, you come to reclaim the house. It's the reality. The city over the centuries changed so many times, and there were about 150,000 or so Germans living in Gdańsk before the Second World War. Let's skip the previous centuries, who fled to the west when the Red Army arrived, and though at least those who can make it, and 150,000 Polish people who used to live in the Polish part of Ukraine, which was then incorporated into Ukraine, were moved to Gdańsk. So they are living there, and they're wondering who will next come to relocate them. Not anymore today, but this, when we shot the movie, which was in 78, there was still this very strong fear and uncertainty. So it goes without saying that we were not going to shoot in such dread and dire a set. I can show it better. Here is the facade development of the streets. This is what it really, the street looked like when we were there. When we got there, this is how the production designer imagined he could dress up the thing to give it back the kind of nostalgia look of the 40s, with the displays in the windows, the entrance to kind of a Red District hotel, and so on, and the bicycle of the fish delivery man. Looks great on paper, a little less so in the reality. This is how now the facades up there were repainted to become what was to be the set of the movie. The true magic only happens once you put up the camera and you take bits and pieces of that. You never shoot the whole set, which would look like a set, but you make it live. You make it live through your camera angle. Like you may add up a guy who is walking, a sandwich man who is walking with a sign. You've got the old street signs, a column with posters, and so on. I show this also because it shows how with not so many means you can transform a set into something that would be like out of another time, and basically hoping for that it would not look so real anymore. I think there's nothing wrong with a movie set or a street you repainted and you dressed to be a location, that it becomes slightly artificial. It helps, the same as the characters. Okay, they should wear every day costumes, but still the costume should be telling, like this is an overall only this kind of a character would wear, this is the kind of cap only him would have, and so on. To make it a little more exemplary, different from just any arbitrary reality. Give it some specific, you may call it, poetic reality. And that goes, of course, for the window of shop, of his own shop, of Alfred Mazerat, Oscar's father's shop. So again, you look for the kind of design of that period. So far, so good. We had the city of Gdańsk. We started to be a little more confident that it could be made by transforming it this way. For the cast, I immediately came to mind the actress from the movie I had just finished, Lost Honor of Katarina Blum, Angela Winkler, that she would be perfect for his mother. There was a wonderful Polish actor who was the lead a lot of WWII films, Daniel Olbryski, obviously qualified for the Polish uncle, and so on. But what about the dwarf? The main character is a dwarf. Is a little man, is also described later on as, you know, being a hunchback. And so you think of these clowns in the circus, these dwarfs, Lilliputians and whatnot. And we started to travel all over Europe, starting in Germany and France, Italy, to meet all these wonderful little guys who play the clowns and whatnot in the circus. And they were all charming and interested, and some, of course, knew about the tin drum, the novel where a dwarf was the hero. Of course, for a dwarf, that's an interesting topic. For a dwarf. But my friend Bertrand Tavernier, we had been at school together, I met over lunch in Paris while I was looking for my circus dwarf, said, I don't know if it's such a good proposition, this novel. I mean, what's your target group? How many dwarfs are there in an audience? And I say, oh, come on, Bertrand, you know, it's a metaphor. It's the dwarf stands for a child who does not want to be a real grown-up. And as I was saying it, stupid, a child. All we need is a child. We can play the kid. It worked with Chaplin. All we need is to find a little Jackie Coogan. And so I started anew and realized, came to so many children, some actor children, some others, and so. Now he was supposed to be 3-year-old, to look like a 3-year-old. That obviously was impossible. You can't make a million movie with 80 shooting days with a 3-year-old. Not reliable. We looked at, well, some more talented, 6 or 7 years old ones. Was not right either. I went to see a professor, doctor at the Munich University Hospital, specialized in problems of growing. And of course, he says, sure, I know. The tin drum, he throws himself down the staircase and then doesn't grow anymore. I said, well, would that be possible? He said, no, not really, not by falling down the staircase. But of course, there are many cases of what ultimately will become dwarfs, children who don't grow as they should. And that's what we are working on to find out. And sometimes it's genetic, sometimes it's hormones, and for most of the time, it's still a mystery. And we don't quite know. And I said, well, do you know such cases? Do you have anything in treatment? He said, yeah, that's my job. But people, families really don't like to display such children. In former times, especially in the countryside, they were put in the pigsty or with the cows or somewhere in the stables. They were the shame of the family. They were not to be seen. But there is a case, I know the family, I think they won't mind, because the father is an actor, the mother is a dancer, and he names a name, Heinz Bennett, and well, Heinz Bennett was the lawyer in The Lost Honor of Katarina Blum. He was an actor I well knew, as well as his wife. I had no idea about his son. And so he says, well, his son is he's 10 years old now, and he's about half the size he should be at his age, and so on. I'm very intrigued. I call up the father, make an appointment with his son. He immediately understood. He said, oh yeah, I heard you were tackling the tin drum, so that's probably why you're interested in David, that's his name. and I come and pick up David, and I thought to be relaxed and to get better to know him, I take him to the Oktoberfest, because that happened just to be the time in Munich. And I took him to the Oktoberfest, and in those days we didn't have video, and test shots for casting on 35. That was too expensive, and I had developed, ever since I was Louis Malle's assistant, a technique to come in with my Leica and just to shoot a roll of film while you talk with somebody or while you observe. And sometimes I still use this method today, because what happens is you don't even print the pictures. You just take what was then called the contact sheet, where you had these 36 little thumbnail frames. And when a good-looking person, model or whatever, would look exactly the same on all the 36 thumbnails, for the movies, forget it. There's other people who'd have 3 or 4 or 5 different expressions on these pictures that you just shot at random. Well, David's role, he had 36 different expressions on 36 frames. Sometimes looking like 100 years old, sometimes really looking very small, sometimes you forgot about his age, then a total child, almost a baby, then like retarded, and on the next one extremely intelligent. There you can basically see his size, this being the counter of a stand, you know, where you can hammer nails or so here. So he just reached the thing, meaning he was about this size, 1 meter. And the expression, just a random shot, you know, just nothing special, told everything. So this was a miracle, because if this movie, we still talk about it today, and if there's infinite editions on DVD and whatnot, is strictly because of him. It's, I think, Gunter Grass' novel is secondary. Certainly my directing is more than third place. It is because even still today, when you watch it, you know, this child strikes you, and it's as you know, a very rare find. And to make a movie, you've got to be very lucky. So here now we had the other actors, and we had him. So this time on a sound stage in a small studio, we set up basically what would be a family living room, the table, a few chairs, and a door. And we rehearsed with them the scene where he comes in with his drum, and the father wants to take the drum away because it gets on his nerve, this constant drumming, and he says, Oscar will nicht, Oscar doesn't want to, and the father by force tries to take the drum. Oscar screams, and glass breaks all of a sudden. Clock and the windows get shattered, and everybody is stunned. So this was about 3 or 4 months prior to the shooting of the scene, of which here is still then later, and we got a feeling whether this family and this uncle, far more handsome than the father, of course, and Oscar's caring mother, that they would all fit together, and that somehow the idea that this little boy here would be, say, a 3-year-old who refuses to grow up and would stay this way forever was extremely intriguing. We felt, at least for this scene, it would work. We had no idea yet how further on it would work. But like the basic element seemed to be there. So back to Gdańsk, where we also had to transform not only the street of Oscars, but of course the look of this pretty run-down socialist city. So we put up, some elements to dress it. Smoke is always good, and you're back from this dreary picture to fish market in former times. At this point, it might be interesting to show a scene of the movie. Or let's first say, we show the scene first. Now this is technology. Now will I take out this record? Oops. This DVD. No. I'll have to close it. Too complicated. I'll explain the scene first and show it later, and then we'll have a break anyhow. So Oscar is getting born. Of course, we thought when he is born, we had to use a real baby. We actually had a pregnant lady. We had a little baby. There it is, I think, you don't really see it there. And it was ugly, it was smeary, there was, blood and whatever, all that stuff. It was not a character out of fiction. And I remembered all of a sudden a Brazilian movie, Macanuima, or was it Mexican? Well, anyhow, South American, with the main character Cantinflas. Great Mexican comedian. And but this was a Brazilian movie because it was set in the Sierra somewhere. And there is a scene where a peasant woman gives birth to a child, and she has these wide skirts and a very wonderful technique. She holds on to the branch of a tree and then shakes, and ultimately the baby must have dropped because there is a cry. And she lifts her shirt, and there is 40-year-old Cantinflas doing and it works somehow. I mean, in the terms of comedy, it works. So I thought if they can do it with 40-year-old Cantinflas, we'll do it with 11-year-old David. We put up a makeup for him. We put him in a bathtub that has a huge handle, so that he would look smaller, and we broke the scene down, and we did not use this shot at all with the real baby. Now he had to hang upside down when the nurse is holding him up. Now the 11-year-old, even small David, no nurse could hold up, so we had to build a whole scaffold. And for right here, for the scene when he comes out of this belly, which is a real pregnant woman's belly, we have to show him beforehand in his mother's womb. So we built a box where David could crawl in, and at a certain point, then he would be seen within this watery box, and he would peek out through like a curtain-like red thing and see the day of light. Here we see it a little better. Now this is all done by incredibly primitive means. You see, it's a box with some red tissue and plastic and stuff, and that was mother's womb, and then he looks up and down. And I pretend it worked better than any CGI effects or so that you could have imagined. These, by the way, are my so-called storyboards, just very simple renderings. When he comes to as he says, he saw the day of light in form of a 40-watt light bulb, which first he sees upside down as he's holding him like this, and then when he's turned around, he realizes that it's a light bulb. But these very simple means worked because, and actually was daring to do this way, but later we found out it helped to see the story as a fairy tale. It was not with all the effects of Blade Runner or whatever you could imagine with CGI techniques. These were the techniques of Méliès, of the very beginning of filmmaking. They were so simple it was almost laughable. That's when we applied a skull, an artificial prosthetic, something on his face. Of course, he loved that. These were the elements, and you could just see he does indeed enjoy becoming. And this is then in the box, which was supposed to be his mother's womb. And now, why was it important to show him in his mother's womb? Because he hears his mother's heartbeat. And that is actually the only sound you have on that picture, besides some waves as by the seaside, to suggest that he is instead, in fact, in the water. We spared him that. But the heartbeat of his mother may have been his inspiration for the drum, whenever he beats the drum later. The drum could also stay for Gunter Grass' typewriter. Many ways. So this is when he throws himself down the staircase, not so easy to shoot because we needed him to survive, and in fact he was just sitting on the dolly crane in front of the camera, and the camera dollied downwards, and he pretended to be falling over. Again, Hollywood would be ashamed, what simple means we got away. For the earlier scenes, to make it even more early cinema-like and more fairy tale-like, we used an Ascania camera that Buster Keaton must have used to do the cameraman. So it's an old silent movie camera. Doesn't have a viewfinder because they used to look through the film, but it was black and white film. Through color film you can't see through. So we were shooting kind of blind out of the hip, this being, by the way, the genial cinematographer Igor Luther. Same, now when he was shattering glass, here's the camera, shoots the lantern. Here is our prop man with the gun. He shoots the glass, and then it's shattered. More complicated was with the scene with his school teacher, Spollenhauer, who wants to take his thumb away in the classroom because he's disturbing the class. There our prop man built a dummy look-alike like the teacher, but the dummy at the back of her head had a little gun, was shooting a bullet through her head and through the glasses, so that the glasses were shattered, this being of course the dummy. But for the short moment you intercut it with the actress, it works. Again, extremely primitive. More demanding was when he climbs up the tower of the city in Gdańsk and looks at the beautiful palace in front of him. The sun is just setting, and the sun is glowing in all the window panes of the castle, and he decides to wipe out this glowing by a very powerful scream that shattered all the window glasses of this. Now that would have taken a machine gun to accomplish, but this is classified or how do you say, a historical monument you cannot shoot into. So these were glasses made of sugar with tiny little explosives on every single one of them. An infinite work. Another unforgettable scene is when they are on the beach. His mother is pregnant, and they see a fisherman who takes a horse's head out of the water, which he actually uses to fish eel. And the eels are all attached to this. A lot of people don't eat eel ever since. They've seen that scene. In fact, it was very properly made. It was an artificial horse's head with a chamber within and some nylon wires. And the eels were kind of attached and glued to it. It's like the Medusa head. So they wouldn't swim away while the cord was here attached, and he's pulling it from the water onto the beach, and the eel don't get away. This has been seen by his mother in flaming red. Her costumes evolved from light red as a girl to very flaming red at the adulterous woman with her lover, the Polish uncle, the costume lady had done this whole succession of getting her more and more red. In the movie then, I mean, these fish eel trigger that she's going from there on to engorge fish and fish upon fish upon fish and sardines with her oil until she ultimately dies. Now, is there a meaning to this? Now, this is something I discussed in very much detail with Gunter Grass. And he said, well, this image could be, of course, the uterus and another baby was going to come out for her. But on the other hand, she feels that she's very Catholic, and she feels the sin, even though she loves this second lover, husband, uncle. But she feels it's a sin. She runs to church all the time to confess. And now fish peaches was the sign for Christianity, because isthmus in Greek are the letters for fish, and so the early Christians in their catacombs they had a secret sign to signify which sect they belonged to, the Christian sect, and they just drew a fish. So maybe Christian guilt killed her, and that's why she killed herself with fish. Charles Aznavour played the shopkeeper, Sigismund Marcus, where Oscar always goes to get a new tin drum when one is finished. And this is also where his mother brings him when she meets his uncle secretly in this Red District Hotel. Now this is a tiny part in the movie. He has 3 scenes, and Charles Aznavour was in those days extremely famous in Europe, not only as a singer, but also he'd done some acting with Truffaut and Don't Shoot the Pianist, and so on. So why him in this small part? The main character in our movie was a totally unknown boy. His parents were a little lesser known, or a little more known. The bit players were all extremely known, meaning you go from the center to the edges and you fortify the edges. Also, it has an emotional impact. I mean, of course, we all know cameo players, and sometimes it's more convincing, and Henry Fonda in the part of Warsaw. Sometimes it's a gimmick just to have a few more names on the billboard. In this case, Sigismund Marcus, being Jewish and the Nazis coming to destroy his shop in the so-called Crystal Night, and smearing all over the toys in his shop, he kills himself. Now, if he was an unknown bit player who kills himself, you'd say, yeah, tragic destiny, bad for him. If Charles Aznavour kills himself, shit, that's major. That's a character the audience likes. He's not unknown, he is there. Oh my God, a man like him would have had to kill himself. It makes a point. Besides, he is charming. I've seen him a month ago. He's still singing, 85 years old, and preparing his next appearance at the Paris Music Hall, Olympia. Another scene and another casting problem. After Oscar's mother is dead, a girl from the countryside comes in to help the father. She's a cousin of the family. 18 years old in the movie, in the story, 21 was the actress, wonderful Katarina Thalbach. And I offer her the part, which is a wonderful part, and strange enough, she turns it down. I said, why? Well, she was very bashful. She said, well, there is this scene in the bathing cabin where she's undressing, and as it says, Oscar sees for the first time the black triangle, and he throws himself upon it, and so on and so on. And she says, I cannot. That's one of the scenes that made the book famous, of course. No, I can't do it. So in despair, because I really wanted her for the part, I sat down and I said, look, you don't have to undress. We'll pretend, we'll make believe that you're naked, but we'll shoot it in such a way that it won't show. So she said, how could this be done? Well, we were at a hotel. I took the stationery from the hotel and started this drawing, which fortunately I kept for reasons I'll tell you later. So the two of them are in the bathing scene that she undresses Oscar, puts on his knitted bathing suit, which scratches as he remembers, and then he looks at her, waiting for her to undress. Oscar looks at her, he says. Now, she is aware of the embarrassing situation and starts to whistle. So she is whistling, she's taking off her bra back to him and hang it in the cabin. Next, we don't pan, we pan to her feet, and you see that she took off her panties and kicks them away off. She says, well, this is just what I won't do. I say, yes, there's no problem, because you'll have two panties. The one you take off, and the other one you keep on, so nobody in the crew, and certainly not on screen, will see your behind. So this is what it looked like. And then we cut to Oscar, because now then she would turn around towards him, and he would stare and see, as I show here primitively, the black triangle. Now we show her from behind, him in front, so we don't see her breast. And he would jump her, and she said, yes, but there you see my behind. I said, don't worry, we'll cut here. So that was all part of the deal. So the camera will not go any lower than that. Yeah, but now comes the shot where Oscar is in front of her. I said, no problem. I remembered a similar case of a bashful actress that was in Hiroshima, Mon Amour. And as I worked with Alain René on Marienbad, and Hiroshima and Mon Amour had been his previous movie, the continuity girl told me that the actress in Hiroshima Mon Amour, Emmanuelle Riva, was so bashful that she didn't want to do the love scenes in the bed at the beginning of the movie. Yet they were naked. Yet they were so very important because then they get covered in ashes, and then from this love scene he goes to the dead bodies, the calcinated bodies in Hiroshima. So he could not renounce it, and he said, well, we'll shoot it in such a way that we won't see your nipple. Nipplegate, always this problem. And he said, but how could I be sure of it? And he said, well, we'll take black felt and gaffer tape, you know, and put it on your nipples. So this is a mini bikini, but you'll be safe, and the same for the black triangle. I always thought this story very funny, and I remembered it, and I said, well, this is exactly what we do, you know, we'll put black felt with gaffer tape on your breasts and on your black triangle, so you will be sure we'll never show it on film, because it can't be shown. Everybody would wonder. We'll have to frame it in such a way that it's not in frame. And you will be protected, and there will be no, this is then the picture in the movie, and there will be no bodily contact between your frontal nudity and Oscar's face. This shot, of course, we cannot do, we agree. Okay. We can go sideways, yes, where we don't see the black felt. Okay. Upon which she agreed, fortunately, to do the part, and the scene then goes on. She throws him away, he's in a corner and starts crying. She's always seen from the back. So we have the feeling throughout the scene that she is totally naked and showing his frontal nudity to him, and he is actually whatever doing to her black triangle. Fortunately, I kept the storyboard because a few years after the film was released, a judge in Oklahoma saw it on his daughter's video player, who was working on the tin drum for her literature class. And he said, this is clearly, child pornography. And he called up, what was the big video chain at the time? Yeah. And said, who else rented this video, and sent out the sheriff cars to collect this video, and what's the chain? No, it's I think they closed down. It was the biggest video chain before internet came up. Blockbuster. And Blockbuster had delivered the list of the clients to the sheriff, and the sheriff went out with his cars to collect all over Oklahoma, whatever. It may have been 12 copies or so of the tin drum. So we had to go on trial for child pornography, and fortunately with the storyboards I could prove that there never was any contact between little David's nose or tongue and Katarina's genitals, but in turn the League for Citizenship, Democracy, or whatnot rights went on trial against the judge or the prosecutor. It was not the judge, it was the prosecutor's house and daughter. And he lost everything he could be, and so did Blockbuster, because they had delivered the lists, and that was a violation of citizen privacy rights. Good, I will go on here. That's other scenes. this is actually little Oscar's real father, David Bennett, who plays the greengrocer. This is a wonderful Polish actor, Feingold, who plays the Jewish survivor of Treblinka, who will take over the shop. This is a scene that was not in the original editing. I'll tell you more after the coffee break. This is the way I was directing David, by spoiling him, simply. And this is Gunter Grass looking at his characters, all of a sudden back from fiction back to reality. And this is the doers of the thing. This is storyboards or little drawings, as Jean-Claude Carrière, the screenwriter, loves to do during the writing to illustrate whether a scene would work. And this was the poster, which was not allowed in the USA, by Polish artist Roland Tobor. And somehow, I love this poster because it's so telling, but I also love it because when we started the movie, this was about the idea we had of the main character. It was an unreal creature, a dwarf, something out of a fairy tale you could imagine, but you could not imagine an actor who would do this part. How do you do it? Anyhow, we'll go more into detail and with some clips from the movie after coffee break. Thank you. I'll just show you a few clips of scenes we've been talking about, going backwards, maybe from the one in the cabin. So you remember from the storyboard, this was the two shots where they enter the cabin and start to undress. She's whistling. She's trying to peek through a hole in the next cabin. We talk about music too. Whoever had such a handmade bathing dress? Second panties are still on her. The look is amazing. I don't know how he did it. So I'm forever grateful to the actress that she was so bashful. No. I don't know how I get from here back to the main Wish my daughter was here. Help.
I think you put.
Menu. Yeah. Not permitted. I don't know. Shit. Chapter.
Put escape. And I'll begin.
The title.
Is there a Mac media person?
If you're a media person who would know how I can get back to chapters.
You hit stop? Did you hit stop?
Yes, I did.
Escape.
Put escape and see what happens if it starts all over.
No, it might only work when it's playing.
Yeah.
We have to hit play again and then.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to square one. Sorry for that. Oh my God. No. We don't want this.
If you go back to the DVD player, it'll pick it up automatically.
Everything close up.
Applications.
So maybe you can.
Oh, no, that's where we stopped.
Hit menu.
Menu from here.
Thank you. Okay, so this was the bathing cabin. Now we go to his birth.
Susanne stand mit Zeichen der Jungfrau. Neptun besorgte das 10. Haus der Lebensmittel und verankerte Oskar zwischen.
Don't worry about the subtitles now, we'll get lost. So this is the belly of a real pregnant woman whose face, of course, we can't show as it's not the actress. And now this is him. Now this is the actress, of course. That's the curtain. Opening. Light bulb. It's a boy, and he is hanging upside down. Okay. Back to menu. One last for those who don't remember, maybe. Well, maybe this is another scene that plays very well. So that's his uncle who came to his Sunday visit and who realizes that Beethoven's picture, which used to hang over the piano, has been replaced by Hitler's. One genius for another. and he says, "Blue, you got blue eyes like Oscar."
Die blauen Augen der Bronski.
These are the blue eyes of the Bronskis. That's how he learns who is his father.
Ich kann es einfach nicht ertragen, dass er die Wahrheit nicht weiß.
And now Hitler's radio, that's the radio the Nazis provided to every household, so they could listen.
He's talking tin. Rubbish.
Seitdem uns ein schwörliches Diktat von unserem geliebten deutschen Vaterland getrennt hat. Wir wollen heim ins Reich! Was ist das für ein Freistaat, den man uns großzügig eingeräumt hat? Wie die Laus in den Fels hat man uns die Polen ins Hafengebiet auf die Westerplatte gesetzt. Und mitten in unsere geliebte Altstadt hat man uns eine polnische Post beschert. Wir danken für diese Bescherung. Wir Deutschen hatten schon eine Post, als sich der Pole noch nichts in Briefen zu sagen hatte. Dem haben wir das Heim beigebracht. Doch nun, liebe Parteigenossen und Parteigenossinnen, wollen wir unseren Gast aus dem Reich, den uns der Führer geschickt hat, begrüßen. Soeben betritt der Parteigenosse Albert Forster das Kundgebungsgelände Sieg! Sieg! Sieg!
this is how the 3/4 rhythm of the waltz is more interesting than the 1/2 of a march. Good. Let me just check anything else we want to see. Not really right now. I thought it might be interesting just to stick with this one example of a movie because the work is pretty much the same for every other adaptation. And just I will go back to the diary I kept during the making of the movie, actually at the request of Gunter Grass. That's how he turned me into a writer, because it became then the basis of many more writing later on. It's very good to keep a diary anyhow during work. I mostly did it before and more extensively afterwards, because you can sometimes then it's interesting for the next movie you make when you go back to the diary of the previous one, just to remind you of what all could go wrong. Here, well, I will go through in a few steps through the 2 years it took to make the movie. Mostly, when we were doing the last year in Marienbad, and I was amazed by the meticulous way Alain René set up every shot of the movie, not knowing whether this would ever work. And I must have used, talking with him, the word genius, upon which he replied, "I don't know about genius, I only know about patience and perseverance." Which to this day seems to be the best definition in any work you undertake. So in April 23rd, 1977, for the first time I started reading the Tin Drum. Not entirely. As when it was published in the late 50s, I was in France, as you now know, very interested in French literature, existentialism, Sartre, and all that, and not at all what was happening at the same time in Germany, since I didn't want to be a little German anymore, but assimilate to France. So I had missed entirely about the Tin Drum scandal. I had heard about it, but I was not interested enough to read it. So it was as late as 1977 when the producer insisted that I should read it. I did. And what struck me while I was reading it, not knowing yet this epic definition Gunter Grass gave, like here we have a middle-class family and the mother has a lover, what else is new? The fatherhood is uncertain as far as the boy Oscar is concerned, and they could go on living like forever in this middle-class suburb of a city in their grocery store. If there wasn't a major event, all of a sudden Nazis coming to power, a war starting, and everything being torn apart. The Polish cousin all of a sudden, or uncle, didn't have the right to mix with the Germans anymore. He was killed in the action of attacking the Polish post office on the first day of the war, and so on and so on. And from now on, how do all the characters react to this cataclysm that comes in from the outside? So that indeed struck me, how right Grass was when he gave me this definition that it was an epic novel, and that how interesting these well-known events of the Nazi time and the Second World War and all these things would be if they were shown once again, but not from the main actors, but from the point of view of a child. The fact that there in the beginning there is sometimes a voiceover where Oscar speaks, that is not what makes him the narrator of the story. Even if he didn't utter these few words as he does throughout the picture, he would still be the narrator in the sense that in a cinematic way, he is the storyteller. And in every undertaking, in any movie, the most important thing, whether it's an original screenplay or whether it's coming from a novel actually, is who is telling the story. It may even be two more things, locus and focus. Locus, where is he when he is telling the story? And focus, why is he telling the story in the first place? In the case of the Tin Drum, the locus is an asylum. Oscar is 30 years old. He's been locked away as an alien, as a nut case. And the focus, why is he telling the story, is of course, I'm innocent. I shouldn't be here. And I'll prove you why I shouldn't be here. This is, but you will find such a perspective and such a drive in almost every novel and every movie. Now, the storyteller could be one of the more active characters in the story. It could be a bystander, as in the case of Turles. Or it could be the author who is describing his creatures. It could be a third person storytelling, but still, if it's easy if it's one of the participants or a bystander, because then it's a first term narration. He would say, I did this, I saw that, even if he doesn't speak, but you would feel the way the thing is filmed, who is telling you the story. Mostly also because there would be no scenes without him. Occasionally there could be an exception. There is a scene, but then he must be virtually present, meaning that the people in that scene would either talk about him, about the narrator, or decide about his fate or whatever. So once you've said this, and especially in the screenplay, it's a very strong guideline how to go through it. But beforehand, you have to make the decision: do I tell this story in the first person? From whose point of view? Who is going to be my storyteller? Or is this the kind of objective story that could not be told from one of the participants because maybe there are too many of them, or maybe we are switching very often from one group of people to another group of people to another group of people, and the drama is only created by the simultaneous presence of these different groups, and so it could only be told, let's say, from God's point of view, God being, in this case, of course, the author. Still, if the author is the storyteller, it would be very useful to somehow identify him. identify him in the sense of that we wonder who might be this author who's telling us the story. What kind of a sense of humor does he have? Is he trying to teach us things and know everything better? Or is he lost facing his own story? Is he an exuberant character as, say, Fellini? You can't watch a Fellini movie, and they are all told in the third person, without thinking of Fellini who's telling the story. Because only he would come up with such exaggerated characters and with such and such situations. You could, even if you've never seen more of him than just a photograph, you'd still feel kind of his character, his sense of humor, his universe in it, and so on and so on. And let's say with Proust, of course, you would feel this man in this room with the cork on all the walls and shut off the world, who is remembering a story, and what you see is what he is remembering. So he is virtually present as a narrator, even if we never see him. So in the Tin Drum, it was obvious, and from the beginning, that this little man is the storyteller. At the same time, in the novel, he is telling it sometimes in the first person, me, Oscar, I did this and that, and sometimes in the third person, the plurial majestatis, or whatever it's called, like he speaks of himself as a king would speak of himself, you know. The king decides this and that, so Oscar decides that he is not going to grow anymore. Aggrandizing himself by this, but clearly he is the storyteller. And it's so from the beginning, every event he is describing would be told and filmed, therefore, from a very special perspective, and we would see the world history all of a sudden, so to speak, through the eyes of a child. Now, how do you accomplish this? Simply by placing the camera always on a low angle, as if seen from his height, would be very simple and totally boring in the long term. It has to be told emotionally from his point of view, meaning what he is feeling. And sometimes you could convey this. There is the scene of a Nazi rally, and there's thousands of people. Now you have a tiny little figure walking through this in a very wide shot, and immediately you think, what is this tiny little ant thinking he can accomplish with his little drum when he walks into this world that must seem so big to him? But he walks into it from the backside. You also see that. And in the novel is a line, which you don't need to say because you convey it somehow otherwise. Rallies look very different when you see them from backstage rather from the front. They are all dressed up to be seen from the front, but backstage there is shit. People are peeing against the wall. You know, it's already demystifying the whole thing. So it's just an example how to do this, and a lot of this kind of ideas came while I was reading it, and at the book, let's say by now for the second time, but it was just little ideas. I could not figure how to tell, you know, this whole event, this whole series of weird situations. In the best of cases, I thought this will be like a say on RKO stage, a number of tableaus, you know, the Nazi rally, Hitler's arrival, or the Allies in Normandy, or the Red Army moving into Gdansk. It would always be like almost in the panopticon, in these panoramas they had in the 19th century. It would all be told like in a fresco, sideways, but not really like in a movie forward chronologically, that you would move into a story. You would always have to go sideways. I felt here on May 20th, a month later, I felt compelled, but didn't really see how to do it. So a month later, we did a first visit to Gunter Grass with the producer. Now, I had never met this novelist, who was kind of the most famous one, not only because of his novels, because of his partaking in politics. He was the drummer for Willy Brandt. He organized the electoral campaign for Willy Brandt. He orchestrated somehow when Willy Brandt went onto his knees in front of the monument to the dead in Poland, in Warsaw. He was very adamant against the whole Christian democratic new rich German economic miracle and so on. So it was intimidating, and I told him about these problems very carefully, about these problems I had, how to deal with these 600 pages of epic novel in a movie that would be, say, 2 hours of chronological movement. And he said, but then you got the wrong conception of movies. Movies are free to do much more things. The writer was telling me, than what you imagine. When I started to write the novel, I had, and to organize the material after the first draft, which was a total confusion, I was impressed by the French Nouveau Roman, that was, say, Rob Grillet, I don't know whether you would call it Jean Cairol and whatever, the philosophers will know all that. In the Nouveau Roman, who wanted to depart totally from psychology, that was the novel of the 19th century. Now we would do novels without psychology and even without stories. So of course the Last Year in Marienbad was written by one of the authors of the Nouveau Roman, Alain Robbe-Grillet. And he said, I was somehow impressed by this because I came from the graphic art, and I decided to write each chapter around an object. And actually even often using this object in the title of this chapter. So let's say the chapter would be eels, or the chapter would be the party sign called le bonbon, the candy, which ultimately his first father is swallowing and being killed by the party sign. Or it would be the teacher's glasses. It would be, of course, sometimes the drum. It would be a potato for the chapter of the greengrocer. And he said this was very hard to do in writing. But you, as a filmmaker, well, you just take the object and start with an insert. And now you build your action around this insert and this thing. that's the way a writer imagined filmmaking. But it was helpful, and throughout the picture you will see, hopefully not in too insistent and pedagogical way, the importance of inserts on these objects. But despite these, it's the clock in the family living room also, and it's the red collier of Maria which she always wears throughout. And Oscar seems to be more fascinated by these red beads around her neck. So instead of touching her, he's playing with it. So that's some transfer. Okay, you got the deeper meaning. It was a provocation by Gunter Grass to throw this on my side, but despite the very creative proposal he made, I felt very remote from him and from his universe of these shopkeepers in Gdańsk, in Eastern Prussia, a whole world I did not know anything about. Now, I just came out of this movie with Heinrich Böll, where we had a common political goal, where we were partaking in demonstrations and a lot of nuclear armament, Pershing missiles and whatnot, and the Baader-Meinhof hysteria. So this Gunter Grass was kind of strange to me, and I felt even more intimidated, despite the lentils with pork chops he had cooked there. And I saw, okay, the only way I can approach this is a job that's offered to me, and let's try to do it with the best craftsmanship available. As if it was, I was a guy for hire for this job. With the producer, we moved on from Gunter Grass to Paris and to London to raise money, and with the situation, tell me the story in 3 lines. And there all of a sudden, you have these crocodiles, United Artists in London, Piccadilly, sitting, and you tell them the story in 3 lines of the Tin Drum. And all of a sudden, I realized from meeting to meeting, it worked. It worked better on the audience than it did on myself. Starting, here's a little boy, he refuses to grow, he has 2 fathers, and he becomes kind of the protest incarnate. Now, those were the years. He got this drum, and it's everybody's dream never to grow up and to remain a child forever. It communicated. So that encouraged me, so I thought that maybe there is more than just a job for hire. And the episode I told you, Lunch with Bertrand Tavernier, where I came to realize that we were not looking for a dwarf, but we were looking for a child, for a little Jackie Coogan. And so the next step was to find a writer to work with on the screenplay. Gunter Grass offered himself to be that screenwriter. Well, of course, I was very alarmed and had to find all kind of diplomatic arguments, that I had to find my own approach to this material, and that I could not be his tool to turn this into a movie, like kind of teleguided. Which he understood, and he said, okay, then you do it, but maybe you show me, different drafts of your work as you go along, so I could react to it. That was part of his deal, by the way. And I was friend of having never worked with him, with the French screenwriter Jean-Claude Carrière, who by then was only working with Buñuel, but whom I had known when he had written screenplays for Louis Malle. And I thought, well, Buñuel, the surrealist, and Jean-Claude, whom I knew had been a gag man before becoming a screenwriter for the holidays of Monsieur Hulot, or whatever it's called in English, Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot, and many other films by Jacques Tati and Pierre Etex. I asked him to read the novel, and I went to see him, and he was immediately interested and thought it wouldn't be that difficult, because he said, I realized that each chapter is written like a vignette in itself, with the gag, and then another gag coming on top of it, and yet another gag. He was seeing it from an almost mechanistic point of view, mechanical point of view, that yes, as a plumber, he thinks, I see where the tubes go and where the flow is in the story. And I was very happy because we wrote the screenplay in French. That liberated me from the incredible power of Gunter Grass's writing. In the translation is read, like a good French book, but in German, he is so inventive with the language, and the language is so proeminent. You, at first reading, you only realize the language, which sometimes he's using medieval expressions and writings and form of writings, and then he goes back to the picaresque novels of the 17th century, and then there is Polish influences and whatnot. All things you cannot translate into images anyhow, but very prominent. And by working in French on it, it put a distance to us. It did not free me from showing the first draft to him, because that was in the deal. So we worked in the morning together. In the afternoon, Jean-Claude wrote down the scene we'd been working on in the morning, and simultaneously I translated the one he had written the day before back into German. So it was an elaborate work, but these kind of different phases helped to shape, because in translating you realize, but do we really need this? Or you realize, you eliminate, or you realize, but here a link is missing, so you add this link. So sometimes detours are pretty good to find your way. Now as to the peer view of the narrator, that was more difficult, because we came to realize if the whole story was told by this guy in an asylum backwards, it would make it very heavy, flashbacks and whatnot, and it would be more interesting to tell this. And we decided, instead of having this locus and focus, the asylum, and I'm telling you this story because I'm innocent, to forget this device, still keep him the main hero, but tell it as if it was a tale by the Grimm brothers. A little man, once upon a time, a woman was sitting on the potato field in her 7 skirts, and a little man came running up towards her, followed by 2 policemen, and he went into hiding under her skirts, and in the process fathered Oscar's mother. And then Oscar is born in the scene you've just seen. So we're in a kind of a mystical world of fairy tales far remote from any reality. We know there's big thunderstorms in an empty street. It's unreal, and so we enter into the story from this angle, soon. At the same time we were writing the screenplay, I started to look for the possibly main actor. Now, what I did not tell you that before we tackled the subject, other producers had tried it. They had been dealing with Roman Polanski to play the part. They had been dealing with Dustin Hoffman to play the part, and so on, and it all didn't work out. So we were lucky enough to do this and to get the support of United Artists European entity to finance the film. So on February 13th, 1978, almost a year after I first read the book, Jean-Claude Carrier and I went to see Gunter Grass in Berlin, having sent him our first draft. Once again, he had been cooking, preparing a meal, fish this time, churbo probably, or butt, or what is it called, his big novel, Der Butt. And he's very keen of cooking meals, and so again the nouveau roman, you know, the importance of objects of this time of a meal. By the end of the meal, he looked at Jean-Claude Carrier and me and said, well, I've read your draft. There's all I have to say. It's not Catholic enough. It's too Cartesian. It's too well constructed. That was his verdict, and he felt it was, everything became too normal. The tragicomical didn't come out enough. The irrational moments didn't show up, hence too Cartesian. The irreality should be as important as the reality. That was another line I noted in my diary. So with this, we went back to the writing desk, and one thing at least we obtained. He accepted our new point of view of storytelling, and omitting and stopping the film in 1945 and omitting the whole post-war period, which for him was very important because I dealt more with nowadays German reality, simply because from the moment Oscar at the end decides to grow in the novel, he grows indeed, and he becomes kind of an ugly hunchback of 20 or 30 years old. And I said, but there we would, now I had found David in the meantime, there we would need another actor. And in a movie, if you substitute for the main character one actor by another, you may have makeup and everything very believable, and well, there's maybe even a resemblance. Well, it doesn't work because the emotional link the audience has established with this character as played by one actor stops the moment you substitute him by another. The audience clearly feels, but this is a different person. He may be playing the same part, but it's not the same person. And I by now became attached to this person, and after 2 hours I'm not going to switch to another one. The only time in my thinking, I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When they made up Dustin Hoffman for Little Big Man to be 100-year-old, they were perfectly aware that it was better to do it this way rather than to put up a real 100-year-old man there, because the emotion remained. The same at when Oscar is born, the real little baby we had on the set for a whole day, and the mother hysterical and whatnot. And when we started to put on grease and blood and whatnot, so he looked like a newborn, which was of course at least 3 weeks old, you know. But you could not identify with this. This is not Oscar, you know, coming into the world and seeing a light bulb, you know. And we decided rather to work with a trick. I said, well, all this was proof that we could not go on all of a sudden for the third part, it would have been, with all of a sudden another actor. And the only time for me, as I said, it worked was Jane Campion's film An Angel at My Table, where she had this, you know, she had even 3 actresses, as I later found out. But they all had one thing in common, this huge red wig. And that was so powerful that somehow I didn't notice the substitution. And somehow emotionally it carried me through. But anyhow, most of the time it doesn't really work, and people have to, yes, but that's him when he was a young man, you know, in the flashback. No, I said, come on, this is another guy, you know, that's him when he was young. Okay, good, you got the point. So that was the major argument that made Gunter Grass accept that we would indeed end the film in 1945. Now, why was he at the beginning, when I had this idea, resenting it so much? He said, but this is just the basic German line, which is there is an hour zero, 1945, and from there on a new Germany started, and it was different from the one that was the fascists. When in fact it was the very same people and the very same places that continued, and sometimes the very same power structures, whether in the medical or in the law courts or wherever, or in the industry. So there was never an hour zero. There can be no hour zero in any society. There is always as much continuity as there is break. And therefore, it is the novel goes until 1955 or 56, to the height of the economic miracle, to show how this so-called miracle was the logic continuity of many things that the Nazis had started with the industry and rationalizing, and so on and so on. For a war industry, and the same principles were applied then for a peace industry, and became very successful, and there was no miracle involved whatsoever. Anyhow, and it was the same determination of the people. Well, if we can't conquer the world militarily, we'll do it economically. And as you all know, they almost succeeded, or we almost succeeded in Europe today. So that was a major ideological point for him. But I said, look, I agree totally with you. It's all my stays in Paris and other countries and so on is all my experience confirms you're saying that there was never an hour zero. But in the telling of the story of this little boy who didn't want to grow up, you know, this story stops when he starts to grow up. And it would be interesting to make then later another movie who would tell that other part. Deal, he said, we'll do that other movie, promised, yes. We worked on 18 different drafts, he and me, and sometimes with Jean-Claude Carrière, to do this second part 10, 15 years later. We never felt that it added up to a real story. The main character didn't have a drum anymore, didn't have a voice that was shattering glass anymore. There was not this curve of world history, as I said, that run in parallel with his own experience. It was totally arbitrary to stop in 1956, because that's the year when Gunter Grass wrote the novel. But writing a screenplay in 1990, say, we would have to go as far as the fall of the wall. And what would Oscar have become in the meantime? So hence 18 drafts, and again and again we tried, it didn't work out. So we knew at least this was it, and this is also at the end of this visit in January '78 that he sent me to Gdańsk, to Danzig, and this is where I was in February taking these photographs you have seen, and I stopped over in Warsaw to meet my friend Andrzej Wajda, and he recommended Daniel Olbrychski for the part. By the way, Andrzej Wajda also had been offered to direct it, and he said, no, I would like to do the post-war period. I don't want the Germans in Poland, in Danzig, that a German director should do. But I wouldn't mind to do, so that is another complication. Next step, in April '78, we were in London to meet with Ken Adam, the cinematographer, and I, and that was the moment where we came to realize that we could not build this dream child city where all the buildings would be much taller than in reality, and it would be a total fantasy tale, and that we were obliged, of course, after the fact, I say probably for the better, to make a step backwards from the fictitious world of the novel to the reality it came from. Several more trips to Poland, to Zagreb, in Yugoslavia, where it was cheaper to shoot, because in Poland we did not get the permit to shoot the movie. The novel was banned in the Soviet world. Why? Because there's just one chapter towards the end when the Russian army enters Danzig, and women were raped, even though in this case it was half with the consentment of the greengrocers women. The book was taboo, and even though Gunter Grass and myself went a lot into East Germany and had a lot of political contacts and were trying, the Ostpolitik contact now, but to show a Russian soldier raping German women, which had happened hundreds and thousands of times, that was an absolute taboo for Moscow. And therefore the book was well known in Poland as a samizdat, but not officially, and therefore we could not get a permit to shoot in Poland. But in Poland there's always a way around things, fortunately, and Andrzej Wajda found a way to help us to get this not as a cinema co-production, but as a television work, and we would just not put the title Tin Drum on it. It would just be a German crew shooting in Danzig. But we had to keep the shoot in Danzig down to maybe 8 days or so, just to take the main symbols of the city, and everything else, like the Polish post office, the attack on the Polish post office, the party rally here, and so on and so on, we shot in former Yugoslavia in Zagreb. Also, after this meeting with Wajda, we were through with the second draft of the screenplay, and in May '78 I was back with Gunter Grass, this time on my own. It was exactly a year after my first visit to him. I was hoping that the script would be more Catholic now and less rational and less Cartesian and have more elements in it. And I started to work with Gunter Grass on the German dialogues. Since we had written this in French, I had translated it using parts of the dialogues of the original novel. But now I sat down with Gunter Grass and he rewrote the dialogues, so it was not the literary dialogues of the book, but make them come alive. And that, while we were doing this in his country house, we really got close to each other. And we had a lot of fun. And I was very impressed because he could just improvise dialogue forever. And I realized that he simply remembered the characters who had been talking to him. Very much like Arthur Miller once told me, you know, The Death of a Salesman I wrote in 3 weeks. I sat in my country home and they were just talking to me, and I just remembered all these talks in Brooklyn when I had been growing up and there was only salesmen around, you know, and they were all whispering in my ears and I just had to write it down. Pretty much this way I was writing down the dialogues Gunter Grass dictated. There was one character of the baker I had offered an actor, and he says, no, it was kind of a tall, skinny actor, you know, this, you know, bakers have to get up at 2 in the morning every night, so they all look kind of pale and sick and worn out. No, that's the character I had picked. He said, no, but he was a short, sturdy guy. He was, sorry, I don't remember this. I went through the whole book, 600 pages, to find a description of the baker. There was none. So next day I tell him, Gunter, I didn't find. Don't worry, I knew him. I can tell you exactly what he looked like, and he started to describe him. So this is how inhabited and how real this whole thing was for him. Same for the school teacher, Frau Spollenhauer, you know, what skirt she was wearing, everything he knew, the shoes, you know, it was amazing. So this thing which, when you read it, is like, you know, a fantasy gone wild, a brain full of imagination, was in fact a strict recording of his souvenirs, but depicted in such a way that they would look grotesque and different and whatever. So it's all in the style. It's not in the material you're dealing with. It's the way you look at the world and the way you render it. This was kind of really the breakthrough at the time we were working on these dialogues, and in the meantime, Andrzej Wajda had accomplished the miracle that we could actually shoot in Poland. And so we did a very extensive location scout in Poland with the cameraman, and I came to understand better these revanchist Germans, you know, 10 million of displaced persons from Eastern Prussia and now Poland territories to West Germany. 10 million had been displaced, and another 5 million Polish from Ukraine to Poland, and whatever else movements have been made. And of course it was a beautiful country. I would have a nostalgia for it. There was these immense open spaces toward the east going on forever, the beautiful beaches of the Baltic Sea and so on, which we all didn't know, because for us this was behind the Iron Curtain. So usually you did not go there, but now on this location trip, and then you see the buildings, and you see the furniture, and you see all the traces of a life that had formerly been there, and it was a Hansa city and so on. So I was compelled even more by now, a long time gone, the idea of this job for hire. It was really, I became more and more obsessed with it, and I said, but you can show this as a beautiful city with this Baroque architecture and the fields and the openness and all that, without claiming it's ours. We got to get rid of this attitude that we cannot tell stories set in these former for a while, for a few centuries, German territories or not, though, because all these right-wing revanchist parties are claiming that this is still German territory. No, you can show it just for the beauty that it is, and that nowadays is Polish people living there, and they enjoy it just as much as the former inhabitants, and that there was a reason why the people were deported, and you didn't have to vote for Hitler and start a war in the first place if you wanted to keep him. So finally, in the month of July, we started shooting. The whole team assembled, and I will just finish with the way of handling David Bennett. First of all, because it's not always easy, I'm told, to work with a child actor, and nobody apparently afterwards managed to work with him. Ridley Scott tried and called me in despair. How did you handle him? I said, we never had a problem, you know. So I don't know what he did wrong, but apparently I did something right, and it was very easy. I just told him, look, David, here, 20 trucks, 10 trailer mobile homes, 200 people, crew, 2,000 extras. You're the chief of all that. They are all here for you. Anything you want, you just ask for it. They are all at your service. This entire circus is yours. His mother was sitting there. Oh my God. How I ever get him back to an education? I spoiled him in everything. I said, look, if it's too hot today under the thing there, we'll wait and we'll shoot only after 5 p.m. Production manager goes crazy. I say, yeah, but this is more important. I can't put him out here in the hot sun, you know, beating his drum if he feels uncomfortable. And so he really felt he was important. It was not just fake, it was not just words. He could physically check that he was indeed number one. All the other actors, of course, were pissed already because not only I was spending so much time and care with David, because also they knew, well, once he was in the scene, nobody would look at them. You know, it was kind of this magnetic thing with his eyes and his presence. And on top of that, he carried his own spot. You know, the spot, if you are in a musical or so, or in a varieté, you have this spotlight, you know, coming onto Cabaret, the singer, or whatever. Well, David was carrying this drum with the white round thing, which was like a spotlight. You couldn't help watching. So this was the way of directing, but it was facilitated that his parents, over the winter, because I found him in October at the Oktoberfest, and now in July we started shooting, had read chapter by chapter the entire novel to him. And when he had questions, they tried to answer them, which was made easier because he never attended school. Because of his things, he was mobbed in schools, and so his mother took over his education, and every year they had to go to the school board to pass certain exams to see that he had indeed learned his stuff. So he spent a year learning the tin drum, which told him about Second World War, gave him an excellent sexual education, and about style and language, and so everybody was happy, and we are friends to this day, and this concludes this portion of the program.